How could we know the value of anything fully if we haven't tried it ourselves? That was a great question posed by the author Hans Rieker from his book titled The Secret of Meditation. He suggests that while meditation may not be for everybody, you won't know until you try it. He is of the idea that when someone attempts to describe something, they are but simply describing its characteristics, but what is experienced is its essence. If the true concept of meditation is understood fully, I believe that meditation can be experienced every moment of one's existence by simply being totally engaged, present in whatever consumes you at any given moment. It's being present with your being of being, your mind, body, and soul. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, the author will cover topics ranging from the clothes for meditation, as well as right posture for meditation and why, and the value of preparing for meditation, as well as objects of meditation, just to name a few. If you just found me at this video, please make sure to visit my playlist as we are now in video 2 of a 3-part series. And to my family, friends, and subscribers, sending you all my sincere love and affection, thank you for all your support. Without any further delay, I now turn the page. Our clothes. The title of this chapter sounds pedantic, but it is not pedantic. To discuss this point also, it is just being careful. Please believe me. In every important undertaking, we always think of our clothes. The more important the occasion, the more careful we are. For church, for a festival, for the theater, for a hall, for a birthday celebration, even for the dance floor, we dress more elegantly, i.e. more carefully than we do for our humdrum everyday lives. And this has become so natural to us that we hardly think about it anymore. Who could expect to be gay if he went to a ball in his working clothes? Every dress creates its own special atmosphere, more so for ourselves than for others. And if at night we usually change our coat in order to be more comfortable, then it is less for direct physical comfort. For after all, our coat wasn't all that uncomfortable, than for psychological comfort, which gives rise to immediate physical satisfaction. We are used to putting most of our everyday life out of our minds when our daily work is done. And if only by changing coats or shoes or by washing, we try to become somebody else. Shouldn't we also try to become somebody else by means of meditation? Shouldn't we try to put as much as possible out of mind? With every part of our everyday self that we take with us, we also carry part of its cares. The very pockets of our working clothes are lined with these cares, and at the slightest opportunity they creep out. This is particularly harmful to meditation. What then should we do? The answer is simple. We must change our clothes. For this, we need not to take out our Sunday suit. We need nothing more than a change, something absolutely clean, which in future will be worn only in the meditation room and nowhere else at all. It will hang on a nail on the door of the room inside. Meditation begins the very moment we put on these clothes, just as a gay mood becomes even gayer the very moment that we put on our best suit. What we wear makes very little difference. It can be ugly and it can be simple, only it must have nothing which reminds us of previous use. Further, it must be clean and immaculate, and must be washed and ironed more frequently than is absolutely necessary. I admit that all this sounds like a strange rite, and it would be just that, if we were not aware that it is only a psychological measure, which can be explained at great length. It is just in this light, and only in this light, that the Japanese sees it, and he takes great pains over this dress ritual. The shoes are also taken off before entering the room, if possible, for they would not only impair squatting and be uncomfortable in many respects, but what applies to the suit applies to them even more forcibly. The outer world sticks to them. Let us sum up. Everything which reminds us of outside stays outside, and everything which is not spotlessly clean must either be changed or cleaned. Here Mr. Miller will pipe up again. There's something that I fail to understand. You said that meditation would give me a clearer vision of my soul, my sorrows, and my life. Very well, but how can you reconcile all this with your blatant efforts to create the greatest possible distance from everyday life, from cares, and the world outside? It is my purpose to create an inviolable island. That may be very well for a half hour, but how can I ameliorate my careworn everyday life while sitting on this island? How from this entire new world, isolated as I am and with eyes closed and thoughts controlled, can I hope to master my problems? Is this just another form of self-deception? It is a known fact that things assume an entire different aspect from a distance. When rage has evaporated and passion has abated, everything looks quite different. And we are often near despair at the thought that, again, we have lost self-control and have acted like fools. It is then that we look at our actions objectively, as if at another's, and somehow we have in fact become another. Yet, we do not know if tomorrow we shall not again be the same, making the same or even new mistakes. We do not know it, for although we think that we know ourselves so well, we cannot rely upon ourselves at all. In small things perhaps, but in questions of passion? There let us gain distance. This will raise our inner life above the confused kaleidoscope of the world around us, will rob it of any possible excuses, such as important work, family duties, inclinations, or necessities, will put it on the dissection table naked so that it can be investigated. Yet it will be as obstinate as possible. Haven't we all experienced that, although we knew how to act, think, and feel differently, nevertheless, for one reason or another, we acted wrongly because we gave in to some weakness? Do we want to assume these weaknesses as given facts? Obviously, we must do so as long as we consider them merely as weaknesses, without recognizing their hidden sources. But when we have removed all possibilities of self-deception, white and not so white lies, then we shall be forced into the open. It is grotesque that these weaknesses do not even balk at using the most simple things in the world around us, such as our dress, as veiled excuses. The old masters knew all this instinctively and showed humanity naked and bare before the final judgment. Let us, therefore, free ourselves from the spell of these so-called necessities before we appoint ourselves judges of our behavior. Let us make things easier for ourselves, for it is nothing else, by not erecting those walls in the first place, which may later become a hindrance. If in what follows we refer to a number of apparently ridiculous, unimportant, pedantic, or naive requirements, the reader is asked to suspend judgment for a little while, for it is only too possible that a derisive smirk may close those portals behind which reverent astonishment awaits him. The right posture for meditation. The well-known Oriental way of squatting cross-legged deserves a whole chapter. It is a constant source of dispute among those skilled in the ways of meditation, for they cannot agree whether this form of squatting is decisive for the success of meditation. The representatives of each of their opinions believe that they have reason on their side, and the reader may decide for himself whether he will side with the theoreticians who consider it irrelevant, or with the practitioners who attach great importance to it. Footnote. This typically Asiatic form of squatting is, especially in its religious applications, not at all so typically Asiatic. The meditative posture of a Christian mystic is very similar to it, especially in the form explained here. See F. Heiler, Bodily Posture in Prayer. End of footnote. Up to now, we have refused to consider unfounded theories, and in this instance, too, we shall stick to our principles. Let us therefore admit at once that the lotus posture is not strictly necessary in theory. yet that it is of great significance for any practical success. We shall explain its necessity here so that it can then be learned without great effort. There are many reasons for, and only one reason against, this form of squatting. Only at first is it a little uncomfortable, but as soon as this difficulty is overcome, the reasons for it become clearer. In the first place, sitting on a chair compared with sitting on the floor is extremely mechanical and unnatural. Let us imagine that we have wandered into the open, that we have climbed up the mountain, and that we are now enjoying the distant beauty as in a dream. The silence of the heavens and of the landscape, the perfume of the grass, the breathing earth. Let us imagine that we do all this sitting on a chair. That's queer thought, isn't it? We are accustomed to seeing the Buddha in the lotus posture, and it is in this way that the layman invariably imagines him. It is interesting, however, to find stone images of a preaching Buddha in a Western posture in the Padulena caves near Nasik, and we immediately get the feeling that something is wrong here. These images do not radiate absolute peace in the same way as the familiar Buddha does. Something seems to speak to us. Something seems to be at work, and this is as it should be, while the lotus posture automatically creates the impression of inner harmony, of absorption rather than of work. Even today, this difference is kept alive in India. I, the teacher, always had to sit a little higher, while my native pupils would squat lotus fashion on the floor. I was active, while they were absorptive. In any event, we wish to achieve a compact posture. It is important that the extremities should be as near the body as possible. This can obviously be done by pulling the knees up into a squatting position. Unfortunately, the body becomes squashed and the blood circulation is unnecessarily impeded. Apart from this, we tend to fall over backwards. The fear of this happening naturally means the end of every attempt to meditate. Why should our arms and legs be as close to the body as possible? In order to put them under the immediate control of consciousness. The fact that consciousness is less effective in stretched out extremities is easily demonstrated. It is, for instance, a well-known fact that, for one reason or another, we tap on the table if we are nervous. If, however, the hand should happen to be close to us, we only start tapping on the table when our excitement and irritation have become extreme, i.e., when controlling consciousness is almost completely overcome by the source of excitation. Conversely, when our arms are far away from the body, this tapping is meaningless and insignificant and is not even noticed. Meditation, however, is particularly concerned with bringing those things to our conscious attention which are normally not noticed, and to test their value. The above equally applies to the feet. Twitching toes belong to the same family as tapping fingers, pathologically meaningless, psychologically significant. If we are just slightly nervous and want to become less so simply by giving our hands and feet free rein, we should realize that this does not work off anything but is a mere manifestation. If we had a clock to measure nervousness, we should come to the surprising conclusion that finger tapping, etc., unmistakably increases nervousness, and that there can be no question of any working off at all. Thus, the nearer the hands and feet are to the body, the more attentively they are watched by our subconscious. This is precisely what happens in the lotus posture. The faithful promise, I can watch my hands and feet even without bothering with the lotus posture, is encouraging, but nevertheless unacceptable, for after all, we do not meditate to watch over our limbs. We have much more important work to do. It may sound odd, but have you ever considered that your feet feel stranger to you than your hands only because your feet are the farther away? Farther away from what? From watching consciousness. It is for this reason that they lead a much more independent life than our hands, which, too, at times are apt to play off their own accord with a handkerchief, a bunch of keys, a matchbox, or a cigarette case. But their own accord is by no means as great as that of our feet, even though the feet have a much more limited sphere of action. We know just how we move our hands, even if we don't watch them. But we become aware of the movements of our feet only when we pay careful attention to them, which happens only in the rarest of cases. There are some extremely clever practical psychologists who control their fellow men, not by studying their faces, but by watching the hands and the feet of their victims, because these have a life of their own, which most clearly betrays what goes on underneath. The power of controlling consciousness reaches them only so weakly, or only if they are deliberately watched, that they betray much more than facial expression. All this should make it clear that here, too, concentration and control are important, though not for the purpose of deceiving our fellow men. Since we do not yet possess an anatomy of the soul which would enable us to delimit the effective realm of controlling consciousness as we can delimit blood circulation or respiration, we must rely on the experience of those people who have such an anatomy, i.e., the Indians of ancient times. Let us imagine a vertebral column as a yardstick, its lowest pole a minus and its highest, the top of the skull, a plus. Footnote. For further information on the anatomy of yoga, see my book, Der Yogi und der Komödiant, The Yogi and the Comedian. And a footnote. Controlling consciousness is effective between both these poles. Naturally, it also extends to the tips of our toes and fingers. We need not stress this, but there it has lost much of its intensity. A child who is afraid of having his hand injured instinctively pulls his arms towards his body to bring them under the protection of his controlling consciousness. Conversely, those who, for instance, when visiting a doctor, do not wish to minimize pain in their hands, but rather want to feel it more strongly, will push their hands as far away from the body as possible. In this connection, it is interesting to note that the pain is not physiologically lessened thereby, but that an attempt is made to ignore it psychologically. Neurophysiological perception depends on the amount of blood circulating through the organ in question. Footnote. Thus, those who, by means of hatha yoga and pranayama practice, can consciously affect their blood circulation, may become completely free of pain. Time after time, this can be seen when we watch dervishes, fakirs, or yogis, those much maligned men who were very often inflict the most horrible wounds upon themselves with needles or daggers, but who apparently feel no pain and do not bleed. Bloodlessness and painlessness therefore go hand in hand. If severe wounds so inflicted heal uncommonly quickly, sometimes within the space of hours, then this is due to an opposite cause, the extraordinary increase in the blood circulation. Here we find that the yogi has a pulse of 130 to 150 beats per minute and a correspondingly increased temperature. This can only be achieved through absolute concentration and a special form of breathing. In our meditative exercises, too, we shall become familiar with physiological manifestations which are, at least in their inner character, related to these events. End of footnote. Man assumes that he cannot regulate pain by himself. He could learn this without any great effort, and so he attempts to remove it from immediate perception. Don't think of it, and then it won't hurt, is a common way of speaking. As we have stressed time after time, in meditation there is no conscious ignoring of any part of our personality. On the contrary, we try to do everything possible to produce a harmonious relationship between all parts of ourselves. As soon as we have overcome the first obstacles and have established inner and outer peace, we shall discover that it is precisely in the lotus posture, rather than in what we would still consider a more comfortable one, that the whole body, including the extremities, forms a strangely compact unit. There is no need to try to establish this, to talk ourselves into it. We shall very soon be able to notice it. This posture, as soon as it is mastered, will be found extremely comfortable and of further advantage. Let us save ourselves the trouble of a long investigation into the reasons and simply accept the strange fact that sitting in our habitual manner increases intellectual thinking. The lotus posture, however, favors intuitive thinking. Genius is always closer to the earth than the intellect, even physically. How do we apply this knowledge to our greatest practical advantage? We could only sit like Orientals, who are used to crossing both legs and arms from earliest childhood, after years of patient and sometimes painful training. Even so, most of us could only learn it so imperfectly that it would not be an advantage at all. For this reason, we simply attempt to approach as near to the original as possible and do not waste too much time, effort, and energy on it. Let us start from the well-known position of squatting cross-legged. This has a number of disadvantages. 1. One leg presses upon the other. 2. Our back has no support, and for this reason we are apt to lean on our arms or knees, or to bend forward so much that we become unnecessarily and unsuitably contorted. 3. It is not relaxing, and relaxation is the alpha and omega of all meditation. 4. The body is squashed. 5. We can't see no advantage in sitting on the floor and feel uncomfortable. Nevertheless, this position is the starting point which we shall adapt for purposes of comfort and suitability. To begin with, we shall take a thick cushion and fold it into a roll of a hand's breadth, and on this roll, laid crosswise, we shall sit in. What could not be done before, putting our legs flat on the floor and crossing them, can now be managed with ease, since the weight of the body has now been shifted to the front. This is how things look now. One leg is so flat on the floor that the heel of the foot can support the body, as the heel lies close to the crutch, directly below the genital region. The other leg is also flat, either close in front of the first, with the soles almost touching it, or bent even more with the foot resting near the instep or the peroneal muscle. If the cushion is too high, the heel will press too strongly. If it is too low, the upper thigh will feel slightly strained. By now it will have become crystal clear that this posture is as comfortable as any, even if, let us admit it, only for a limited period of time at the start. It must become a habit first. The hands rest palm upwards, one upon the other in the lap. The upper part of the body is neither bent forward nor does the chest stand out. The head has a slight tendency towards the front, and we may say that the most comfortable and the most suitable position of the head is when the nose makes an angle of 45 degrees with the floor. Sitting thus, the question of whether or not we may support ourselves does not even arise, for when the weight is evenly distributed, there is no need for support at all. Instead, we have a slight tendency to bend forward, and that does not matter much, for bending forward means inclining towards attention. Bending backwards, however, produces a tendency to sleep. The upper part of the body is freer than when we squat cross-legged, even freer than sitting on a chair, where we either fall to the front or, more frequently, into a sleeping tendency of a lazy support. We can breathe freely, and we can relax adequately and much better than sitting on a chair. This we shall find to our great satisfaction as soon as we have acquired the habit. We can feel the security of the floor, feel that from this position we cannot fall, that we form a compact field of energy whose centers is where our ancestors placed the seat of the soul, and whence all respiration obtains its driving impulse, the solar plexus. The sixth sense. No man can be blamed for not knowing, but only misjudging what he does know. We often consider things as unimportant, although they are not, and conversely, we often waste time and energy on what is utterly insignificant. This is a fault inherent in erring humanity. Not even Goethe was beyond reproach, for he believed that his scientific investigations would make him eternally famous. We have no sense organ for the absolute, and since we can only judge by results, anything that has no direct manifestations, that can only be grasped intuitively or on the basis of inferences and generalized laws must remain inaccessible to experience. We cannot perceive motion directly, but only as change of place with time. Time cannot be perceived either, only processes of change, by which we artificially measure time as the duration of the processes. Space is imperceptible. We are only aware of the relationship of 2 points to each other and the time which is needed to relate one point to the next. This creates a concept of time, but by no means an absolute one. Sense organs, therefore, are nothing but coarse aids to consciousness, which in its turn is handicapped by being tied to pictures and concepts. People who consider that only their sense perceptions matter always ask for proof, yet they could easily discover that a proof by the senses is less valid than a mathematical one, and that an intuitive proof can refute even the mathematical. It is true that contemporary science does not go far enough, even if it went a long way with Einstein proved that the mathematics of the cosmos, i.e., true mathematics, is not logical. Thus, the shortest way is not the straight line. Straight lines do not even exist. Parallel lines can become intertwined, and good old Euclid was quite wrong. As long as we are not ever ready to sacrifice any given datum of rational science to an intuitive idea, science will always keep silent about absolute truth, or even about absolute knowledge, which alone can explain the mechanics of our universe satisfactorily. Even the most exact science has always involved illogical magnitudes such as 0 and infinity. Thus, although all the suggestions made in this book are based on experience, only a part can be proved by rational science, and yet the rest is no metaphysical speculation, since it, too, has been proved empirically. So-called modern science, that is, the science of the last 100 years, refuses to recognize intuitive experience as valid, since it does not completely correspond with analytical experience. It has not yet discovered any connection between intellect and intuition, and is hopelessly lost outside the atrophied system of logico-intellectual analysis. This is understandable from the point of view of intellectual synthesis, but not from that of those who wish to obtain practical results from intuitive experience and who do not place any value on a positivistic, i.e., intellectual system of classification. They prefer to work with the organless sixth sense called either the soul or by any other scientifically unfounded name. Science is quite right when it refuses to recognize the objective existence of the soul. There is no soul, for then, as logic would have it, it would equally be possible that the soul is not. Nevertheless, everything seems to point to a sphere of the soul. Thus we shall just have to accept that there is something which is not. By the way, the same applies to character also. For this reason, the medieval tripartition of man into body, spirit, and soul is by no means naive and outworn. It is only, and this is a gigantic process, shorn of its material character, and thus raised to an infinitely higher level. Nevertheless, it would be dangerous to ask if the medieval concept of spirit and soul was wrong. What is the right concept according to our greater knowledge? Every concept of spirit and soul is false as long as it is merely a concept, i.e., a picture. Let us put it quite unscientifically. There are things which we must take into account without being able to prove them objectively. This is known by everybody who can feel, but those who are cursed by having to think about everything will always land up in the Middle Ages with all its undeveloped ideas of the soul and the intuition. Woe to him who believes that the spirit is no more than thought. Our idea of the world is not formed by our thought, but by the importance which we attach to this thought. If we were to take the results of thought as absolute, then the world too would be absolute. If, on the other hand, we recognize the limits of our thought, then we automatically recognize the limits of our environment. From this it follows that the world around us merely forms the basis of our consciousness, without which there would be no world at all, and that our intuition, insofar as it does not involve thought, and realizing the limits of mentation, has a far greater sphere of action. Scientifically, this cannot be proved as yet, just as only the psychological evolution, not the absolute origin of concepts such as God, love, wisdom, etc., can be explained. Psychology, as a science, had for long been working with similar concepts, but constantly assuming an unknown magnitude which, while it can be proved functionally, can never be proven in a concrete scientific manner. The psychology has become a significant and highly developed subject which, with all its extensions, remains a scientific island. It is true that we can find some path to philosophy from it, but no bridge to concrete science. This bridge is called the soul. To look for it would be just as false as to deny it. To deny the validity of this concept would be just as short-sighted as trying to prove it analytically. Theoretically, much of this remains unsatisfactory, but is much less so in practice, for we love and hate, have sympathy and antipathy, have no desire for this and are more inclined to that, are happy when the sun is shining, oppressed when it rains, have a weakness for this and no time for that, love little children and little dogs, and always talk about the fact that we are in full control of ourselves and know why and wherefore. Why is this so? Because it is not intellectual knowledge, but intuition which molds our inner attitudes. Two forms of thought, intuitive and analytical, keep us constantly on the move, and the one influences the other. At the moment, all we need to know is that we shall have to consider them both, and that each has its own important task, i.e., each must be treated differently, for each one springs from a different layer of the soul, and although they are twin brothers, equally dear to and equally valued by the Father, the Spirit, they have quite opposite characters. I say opposite, for how else could it come about that now and then we fail to understand ourselves? We know that we ought to do one thing, and yet we do the other, that we should have acted thus, and then, in fact, we did the opposite. Goethe speaks of two souls in the breast of Faust. The one knows that meditation is a good thing, the other objects to the small inconveniences which it entails. We do not want to meditate for the sake of scientific results, but simply for abstract, intuitive ones. We want to get to the roots of instinct in order to cultivate them, so that our harvest of the fruits of the tree of life may become richer. Once we realize that certain truths can only be understood intuitively and that our intuition is near the miraculous, then we have already taken the first step towards developing it. Those who cannot judge intuition in its deepest origins call it prejudice, sentiment, bias, inclination, etc. And as modern, clear-thinking men, they are inclined to suppress these things as being unreasonable. True, intuition has not sprung from calculating reason, but it remains to be seen if the results of this unreason do not produce the most natural and the best results. For in calculated thinking, reason falls asleep. With intuitive thinking, the unreason of truth awakes. On the broad temple steps leading down to the Ganges, there sat a sage. A youth came up to him and said, "I desire to be your pupil." "What is your sole and highest aim?" the sage asked. The eyes of the pupil glowed. "God alone," he said, "is my one and only desire. It is the thought of God alone which fills my entire being." The sage got hold of the youth by the hair and dipped his head into the waters of the Ganges. The youth almost drowned. But the wisdom of the sage was great, and at the very last moment he pulled the youth out of the water. "Tell me," the sage asked, "what you were longing for most just then." "For air," the truth-loving youth replied. I see, said the sage. And what of your thoughts of God? The youth smiled. Pray, master, in such a situation, air is more important even than God. How unreasonable, how human. The choice of time. There is hardly anybody who has unlimited leisure. We are usually free at certain hours of the day, and the hours during which we are occupied are usually just as definitely fixed. Thus, the time for meditation is determined from the start. We do not need a whole chapter to arrive at so obvious a conclusion. However, we do wish to consider what influence the time of day has on us and on meditation. Let us preface our remarks by stating that it is essential to stick to the chosen time, and that while we may change it a little on occasion, and even sometimes miss it if absolutely necessary, we may never change it just to suit ourselves. The best hours for meditation are at dawn and at dusk, and of the two, dawn is preferable. Since in winter the day usually begins before sunrise, it is possible to regulate meditation not by the clock, but by the sun. By changing the time a little each day, we ensure the meditation always ends just as the sun rises. The worst time is noon. Late mornings and afternoons are also of little use, while the night is extremely favorable. I wonder if it is not more than an accident that the power for meditation almost exactly corresponds to the sensitivity of a radio receiver. For here too, there is a so-called twilight effect. The sun is not only the symbol of activity, it radiates activity, and the mood which it transmits to us is in its summary rays is not only one of great joy, but also puts us into immediate contact with the life force which quickens not only man and beast, but plants as well. This is good, and as it should be, but activity is something creative, while meditation is not creative but expectant, not dynamic but static, a deliberate moving out of the circle of time in order to obey the natural law of tension and relaxation. We can see this law of nature in the waking of the day and the sleep of night, but only to the most primitive is waking no more than the opposite of sleep. To the more sensitive, consciousness is a state of tension and of constant creation, whose opposite he seeks and finds in the relaxation of expectant silence, in the great inner peace of meditation. Thus, the primitive person is in greater need of religious ritual than the more sensitive one who attaches greater importance to the meaning of the ritual. The plane on which tension and relaxation takes place is decisive, and while to the primitive all creation ends in the material manifestations, and all resting is merely a creative pause, to the more developed person, tension and relaxation are merely the twin processes of spiritual respiration, creation, and self-collection in the continuous stream of life. He experiences a liberation from the shackles of matter, from the shackles of time. The flow will then change direction and proceed from within the core of experience to the work outside, and absorption of experience will, in its turn, nourish this core so that it can emerge refreshed. This can be seen on the larger scale in our work and in our wrestling with its problems, and on the smaller scale in the course of the day. What we create in daylight, we must account for at night. What we create in the bright and vibrant world is judged by the silent, dark judge of nightly self-recollection. What happens at night looks quite different in the light of the day. Slighter, less important, and less relevant. True, it may be more optimistic, but isn't optimism often an excuse for irrelevance? Optimism is one of the greatest treasures of humanity, but it becomes a scourge if we use it to lie facts out of the way instead of paying attention. We alone are the victims of our own faults. Therefore, we must carefully choose the time of judgment, of creative breathing, of avowal, the hours of silence. Here we become free of external shackles, only the more to fill the active hours which are to follow with our nearly one experience. Meditation is no more manipulation, for we ourselves are its result. In meditation, we do not decide, we simply change. Just as the clouds do not change the sun but only veil it, so the absolute in us is only hidden by the fog of deception. Early morning meditation after washing, for we must be spotlessly clean, and before breakfast, for a full stomach is an obstacle, is the most beneficial. Since in the first year we shall not exceed half an hour, we shall not have to sacrifice too much sleep, nor any part of the working day. The fact that morning is the best time is proved by the many benefits which ensue during the rest of the day. It is obvious that a day ended with a stock-taking of ourselves is equally beneficial. In the beginning we shall not attain a very deep understanding of our true selves. This can only develop with time. Our meditating twice a day will not make us more successful in our deeper understanding. However, we need not bother so much with future achievements as with fulfilling the demands of the day. For this, a quarter or a half an hour extra can only be to the good. Those who can should choose the early morning. They will be rewarded much sooner than they expect. Some afterthoughts on the preparations. We have now happily passed the stage of preparations. We enumerated them and tried to justify them. We were often long-winded yet never exhaustive. Let us discard prejudice and simply realize that it is the small details which go to make up the whole picture. Far be it from me to wish to dictate how you must follow the path to your own inner strength. You are fully entitled to ignore everything that is said here, and instead proceed along entirely different paths. For after all, why shouldn't you arrive at the goal by another route? Sometime, somehow, we always arrive at the goal if only we long for it honestly. It is merely a question of effort, of the length of the path, and of the things we must shed on the way. It isn't even certain that the path outlined, but not invented, by me is the shortest. Yet it has proved its worth to many, and it is for this reason that I feel justified in handing it on. If we wish to take stock of all that has been said so far, then apparently nothing more emerges than a man who at the break of day squats on the floor of a bare room. But on drawing an intermediate balance sheet, we shall find that the external is unimportant, insignificant, and may even lead the unbiased observer to false conclusions. What is important is the cause within, the inner course of events and inner results. The unbiased observer, just because he is intelligent, may arrive all the more quickly at false conclusions and thus get a wrong impression of our motives. For this reason, we shall not bother him with our odd ideas at all, but rather convince ourselves that what we do is extremely important. Meditation is a completely personal matter whose success largely depends on how highly personal we make it. Yes, even if our partner in marriage should wish to follow the same path, we should nevertheless neither discuss meditation nor its success. We may only discuss the difficulties, but even this can become dangerous, for with every intellectual discussion we change our inner orientation. The next exercise will then be governed by quite different and predominantly intellectual inner motives, destroying much of the inner peace which we have attained. This is one of the many reasons why a practitioner of meditation only writes books or even holds lectures on the subject with utmost reluctance. He knows that he is robbing himself and the Buddha went so far as to forbid his pupils to do so at the threat of expulsion from the order. It is always best not to occupy oneself intellectually with meditation, its problems and difficulties, just as we keep the external world out of our thoughts during meditation. So meditation should be kept out during the rest of the day. Our life should be as pure and open as possible, not for the sake of meditation, for the matter as such is unimportant, but for the sake of our inner life. If, however, we should find a better way to our true inner selves than meditation, then by all means let us follow it. Nevertheless, as long as meditation seems the best way, and after all, it has proved itself in religions for many millennia, we can hardly do better than those sages before us, to follow one of the many paths of meditation as the way to higher development and to the liberation of inner forces. For the ways to meditation are as manifold as are the faces around us. Now we come to meditation proper. If previously we had reason to complain of a lack of concrete indications, we shall have even more reason to do so now, for here everything can only be understood with that sixth sense which we discussed above, and which, thank God, we all have in us, even if science does not recognize it. Some common sense will help us on this path, unfortunately so abstract. However, on the whole, we shall be working with such concepts as inner voice, conscience, mood, feelings, rather than with more reasonable ones such as nervous system, pain, respiration, etc. We shall be stupid enough not to try to explain the inexplicable, but to see immediate reality in the light of the absolute which is beyond reason. Not because we love the mysterious, but just because our life is a stream, and in every stream it is the source which is most important. Our source, however, lies where mere reason cannot reach. Wouldn't it be interesting to follow the stream as far back as possible? This we shall do, and on its bed we shall discover many precious stones. Mental, spiritual, and physical assumptions for beginning. So far, we have merely indicated the internal and external framework, and if the reader should now sit down full of expectations, he will be sorely disappointed. Notwithstanding the great splash that we have made, we have achieved nothing so far. It is as if we had accidentally come into possession of a mighty magic formula and must conclude to our sorrow that we can achieve nothing with it. The main part begins only now, just as magic formula are not effective in themselves, but depend on the magician. There is nothing magical about meditation, and those who have taken this analogy literally only show that they have not understood a single thing in this book. If now, by setting aside regular periods of time to lying still, we have rid ourselves of those physical complaints which hamper meditation and which generally occupy most of our energy, and divert it from the actual aim, we have passed the stage of preparations. We have achieved some small measure of peace, which, although it is a considerable achievement, is nevertheless only the beginning. Indeed, even when what we shall achieve considerably later, the cessation of bodily sensation, is also no more than a beginning. Nevertheless, it must neither be over nor underestimated. While it is no anesthetic to means of becoming completely free of sensation, it is yet essential for divesting ourselves of all disturbing physical influences during meditation. Nor shall we one day be able to enjoy the sudden cessation of all bodily feelings. Quite wrong. In meditation, there are no surprises, and those who expect them in any shape or form will always be disappointed, either because there will be no surprises at all, or if they should experience unexpected physical phenomena, their very surprise will ensure that there will be no recurrence. However, this happens so rarely that I regret mentioning it at all. Our relationship to our environment, too, changes so naturally and so organically that only when we look very carefully can we see that our life has become a little more evened out. Basically, we shall be able to say no more than that our world is really beginning to become a little more reasonable. A wise student of human weakness once said with great humor, "I have good reason to be satisfied with my father. When I was 7 years old, his ideas were quite unreasonable. 10 years later, he had learned a little more. The older I got, the more reasonable he became, and today I can even listen to what he says." We always believe that the world changes, if we would but learn that it is only our attitude towards it which constantly changes. And similarly, our bodily sensations will not suddenly stop. We shall only become less sensitive to disturbing influences. And where does this take place? Not on the surface, but in the very middle, in the nervous center. Thus we shall not have become insensitive, but we shall merely have acquired other interests. Our attention, which is usually so busily occupied with physical comfort, will devote itself to other and more important things. We shall no longer be distracted while thinking. Indeed, while thinking, we shall even forget that we have a body at all, and we shall become all thought. Let us call it this for the present, since the body no longer forces itself on our consciousness because of our complete relaxed posture and immobility, which have both become habit during the preparatory exercises. We get the distinct feeling that it isn't there at all. We can now await results with confidence. However, until we do obtain them, many things will disturb us, and these cannot be ignored completely. Feeling hot or cold, a desire to cough, toothache, fatigue, etc., all these can be forgotten, but never by force. Feeling cold is no worse than feeling hot, but cold can be prevented by blankets and warm clothes. In the beginning, a strong cough or a toothache will put a stop to all meditation for the whole duration of the complaint. Similarly, if we always feel tired just at the chosen time, it is advisable to change the hour or even to do a special exercises to rouse us beforehand, as is generally done by many Asiatic schools of meditation. In the Japanese Zen monasteries, this exercise often takes the form of a run. If we have not the necessary space, we can do gymnastics exercises instead, but even better, we can use the following breathing exercise of Hatha Yoga. This is the most beneficial, for it increases the oxygen content of the blood evenly and naturally, and not only removes fatigue, but also improves our general physical state. Remain in the position of meditation, which you have already assumed. Thumb and finger of the right hand are placed on the right and left nostril, respectively, while the second and first fingers are loosely placed on top of the nose. The little finger lies alongside the third finger. The tips of the thumb and the third finger are applied only so lightly that there is no definite pressure, but so that breathing can nevertheless be stopped. Now, the left nostril is half opened so that we can inhale without difficulty. Immediately after inhalation, it is closed again. The right nostril is opened halfway, and we exhale equally easily. We inhale again through the same right nostril, half opened, and exhale through the left one, again half opened. Generally, it is sufficient to do this about 10 times. Here, as in everything else, exaggeration can lead to very serious damage. It must be emphasized that this breathing exercise may only be performed on an untaxed stomach and with the upper part of the body held straight. Those who have a weak heart should only try to do this kind of exercise under the supervision of a specialist, and if none is at hand, they should rather shift the time of meditation. We must be patient with our shortcomings and must be magnanimous enough to let them be from time to time, ourselves to remain the stronger. If only we keep both them and our firm resolve to vanquish them in mind, then we shall automatically approach the goal without becoming ascetics, self-torturers. This would only turn meditation into a sheer hell. This constant keeping in mind characterizes the second and probably the most important condition of meditation, its mental starting point. concentration. No one needs to be told what concentration is, but not everyone can master it. Concentration is the only and the unfailing portal to success, to every success in life. And if we have said just this of meditation, then we can only conclude that it is absolutely the same as concentration, but on a higher level. For concentration does not only mean attention, but penetration into things and processes. If we concentrate on our work, it simply means that we have all the necessary facts at our disposal, and that we are capable of surveying and mastering them. It means that we clearly recognize the situation, its circumstances and requirements, and that all that is irrelevant is completely pushed aside. Concentration means gathering the essential. To be concentrated means to be essential. It is just the same with inner concentration. If we constantly bear our shortcomings in mind, and if we try to tear the veil of inessentials from them, they become clearer to us than if we take them as given. We must dig at their roots until they perish. If we are to concentrate on something, this does not mean at all that we must dig ourselves into it desperately. Concentrating has nothing to do with the effort and means no more than a conscious limitation of the field of attention. Thus, it was a custom in ancient India for all archers to meet their masters and to compete with them. A wooden bird was placed on a high pole, and whoever managed to pierce the eye of the bird with his arrow was declared the victor. The marksmen stood in a row, and in order to avoid any misunderstandings about the aim, everyone was asked what he thought his aim was before his turn came. All answered faithfully, "A bird." Only Arjuna, a wise youth, said, "I see the eye of the bird." Arjuna emerged victorious from that match. It is not only undistracted attention which is decisive here, but what we might almost call a mysterious way of penetrating into the nature of things. Thus, Gilbert Hyatt tells us of his extremely significant meeting with his teacher, Louis Agassiz, the great Swiss natural scientist, a man who, as Hyatt says, could see things which other people did not. Quote, "In front of me on the table there stood a flat bowl, and Agassiz brought me a small fish with the instruction to study it, and not to speak to anybody about it under any circumstances, or to read up anything on the subject. Try to find out what you can," he said, "but please, without damaging the animal. When I think that you are ready, I shall examine you." After an hour, I thought that I had found out everything there was to discover, and I was keen on giving my report and on getting a further assignment. But Agassiz, although constantly within calling distance, didn't bother with me the whole day long, nor on the next day and the day after that. I saw, however, that he watched me carefully. Thus I renewed my labors, and in the course of 100 hours, I had done about 100 times more than I had thought possible at the beginning. I was now full of expectations that I should be allowed to display my new one knowledge to the master, but still he only bade me a friendly good morning and no more. Finally, on the 7th day, came the question, "Well?" And while he sat at the corner of my table smoking a cigar, I gave an account of my discoveries. After I had delivered a lecture lasting some hours, he jumped up from the table, made ready to go, and said, "This is a mere nothing." It was clear that all he wanted was to test my endurance, and that spurred me on. I went to work again, destroyed my first results, and after a further week of 10 hours, work daily, I had results which more than astonished me, and which satisfied him. I think we are better judges of whether Agassiz merely wanted to test his pupils' endurance, or if he did not perhaps read a more important meaning into the task. Here we find everything that can be said about practical concentration, concentration on the process, looking at it carefully time after time, and identification with its essence. All this can only be experienced. If two men are each placed on a lonely island, and if one were given a comprehensive library of Western philosophy and the other only one single wise book, The first one is likely to become a learned man in time. The second, however, a sage. Concentration means occupying oneself with one object exclusively. So exclusively that even the intention to concentrate is forgotten. The housewife who concentrates on her work will never drop a plate, will do her housework more quickly and more thoroughly, and will never try to excuse herself by saying that what I lack in brain I make up in brawn. Certainly, it is possible to do two things at the same time, but with this we do not do twice as much, but merely do twice half the work, or even less. Concentration presupposes thinking, conscious thought about the demands of the moment. When we read a book, we do so mainly to recuperate from our own thinking. We let ourselves become affected by the thoughts of the author, and we see the pictures which his thoughts convey to us. We follow his thoughts with our feelings instead of penetrating his feelings with our thoughts. It is for this reason that the majority of people have a natural aversion to scientific, or apparently scientific, books, for they require, if not independent thought, at least thinking with the author, and this presupposes concentration on the given subject. If you are serious about concentration, you will harvest wonderful surprises and further fruits as well. Choose a scientific book whose contents seem to interest you and read one chapter daily. Then try after every chapter to write a short preface of it. This must be done in the manner of Christ. When I do not understand a thing, I deliver a lecture on it. Doing this educates us to follow thoughts, to think logically. Logic, however, means consistency, and the correctness of the conclusion can only be tested if we concentrate on it. This is true for science, for daily work, for all things in life. Without concentration, we have only the form. It is the depth of our concentration, however, which determines the depth of our penetration into the essence of the thing. The enemy of all concentration is prejudice. It tries to determine the result of concentration in advance. Prejudice does not think logically. It does not ask why, and remains on the deceptive surface. The mark of the sage is the lack of prejudice, that of the fool the lack of thought. Politics uses the human weakness of inadequate intellectual penetration and calls this propaganda. It awakens instinct, but not reflection. It delivers opinions without allowing them to grow consistently. It cultivates prejudice in order to make use of it. That is why, in totalitarian states, intelligence is always quite especially supervised, because dictators particularly have good reason to fear independent thinking and logic, which would enable people to see through their doubtful methods. Only those are truly free who have learned to think. Thinking, however, presupposes concentration, cold-blooded, i.e., dispassionate reflection on events, taking an independent stand, being uninfluenced by the opinion of others. This comes nearest to intuitive thinking, which is never deceived. If we learn to correlate intuitive and calculated thought, we have all the means of mental freedom at our disposal. Then we shall be able to shape our lives with our own hands, and we shall have risen above the mass without becoming dictatorial towards it. If you want to free yourself of the opinion of others, you must understand it better. Those who have their own opinions, their own mode of thinking, understand the opinions and the thought of others. And those who have elevated themselves above the mass begin to recognize the nature of the human heart and soul, just as a landscape is seen from the top of a mountain. The greater our distance from things, the deeper our penetration. This may be a paradox, but it nevertheless is true. The newspaper, for instance, relieves us of thought. It is even a law amongst journalists not to presuppose thought in the reader. Those newspapers which best fulfill this condition will always have the greatest circulation. Thus we get our opinions ready-made, and those who dare to have their own will have to print their own newspapers. But let us do something unusual. Let us take a newspaper and from it an event of the day. Let us strip it of every commentary. Simply take it as pure event and try to understand it objectively. Perhaps the behavior of a plaintiff. When we have done this as intensely as Agassiz asked his pupil to observe a fish, and if we do this with all important matters directly or indirectly concerning us, we shall slowly learn 1. To know what concentration and its results are. 2. To obtain results from meditation most easily. 3. To see the world through different and wiser eyes. 4. To develop abilities and forces which previously we had never even suspected. Now we know the second requirement, the ability to concentrate. The first one was mastery of the body. But while the mastery of the former had only advantages, the latter has some apparent dangers, and especially when we try to hasten the natural development of concentration by force because of our impatience. If we try to master the body by force, then too there are disadvantages, but they remain physical, for we do so at the expense of our nerves. If, however, we try to accelerate the ability to concentrate above the organically possible without having the spiritual resources to cope with the result, then there will occur what the Middle Ages called the revenge of the spirits for being conjured up unbidden. This is only too natural. From the storeroom of repressions, of which most of us have our share, more comes to the surface than consciousness can digest. And since things only manifest themselves in the environment, it suddenly appears as if we were persecuted by fate. We are suddenly pushed into difficulties. While there is a feeling that we have become purer, we are nevertheless confronted by the indisputable fact that life seems full of new obstacles which we can hardly cope with. All this has occurred because, while through our deeper understanding, the direct result of meditation, we obtained a clear comprehension of our inner conditions and of our inner shortcomings, we could not yet mobilize relieving forces. It is no news that we must not merely recognize our shortcomings, but we must also be ready to remove them and to work on ourselves in this direction. How to do this correctly is the crux of the whole matter if we wish to achieve anything at all. A thief who, in order to stop stealing, has to amputate his fingers, will not cease to be a thief. He will only become a repressed thief. Thus, the forcing of premature success in meditation beyond the natural development simply liberates new or, more frequently, old but repressed inadequacies, which then appear in the most impossible light, never obviously as our own shortcomings, but always as external problems which previously appeared insignificant. This liberating process, which in itself is positive, can thus become quite unpleasant. And we can understand why people always recommend a teacher for meditation. However, modern emancipated man is clearly convinced of the necessity of a natural process of growth and knows at least what is meant by patience and organic development. Just as regular exercises automatically lead to success, so does regular exaggeration automatically lead to inner harm, here as in everything else in life. If we accept the words of Shakespeare, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. Then the cause of all this is quite clear. For then we see that the power of concentration is a real power, capable of awakening our innermost soul. Our innermost soul is the source of our fate. And all those hidden fate-forming factors, the spirits of the Middle Ages, thus become liberated. They become oppressively active. But if through meditation we have forged the right weapons, we can give them battle with confidence. Dangers, as we said before, only exist when we are foolhardy enough to carry out premature experiments with our inner life. True, for this to happen, we require extraordinary curiosity coupled with tremendous energy. But those who have the wrong ideas and expect grandiose and extraordinary things as the result of forced spiritual measures are often only too willing victims of these dangers. Therefore, let us be warned, and let us follow the advice of the ancients, not to do any strenuous concentration exercises, but merely to concentrate on what we do and think, to look at things as they really are, to let the essence of things work upon us, to watch everything without prejudice, to learn to think, but not to desire spiritual self-improvement by force. Meditation is not the impetus which sets our inner pendulum in motion, but the removal of all obstacles which deflect the natural vibration of this pendulum. Thus both enemies and weapons are mobilized simultaneously, and we do not aimlessly build bridges to unknown shores or arouse those enemies against whom we are defenseless. The objects of meditation. What happens to my inner self when I meditate? How must I direct my thoughts? Which thoughts are useful and help me on, and which lead me away from the goal? The simple answer is, all consistently conscious thoughts will help somehow. Since we wish to develop in the most positive direction, we have to plan even the choice of thought. Let us systematically consider the thought material at our disposal. Thoughts can be divided into two groups. 1, thoughts about our own personality and its makeup. 2, thoughts about the influence of the environment. A more detailed classification of first one is A, contemplation and discussion of our own body. B, contemplation of our own feelings. C, contemplation of our own thinking. D, contemplation of what we think and feel about. Before entering into the details of thoughts about the influence of the environment, group 2, we must be clear about the process of thinking itself, about the seat of the mental process, about the effect of feeling on thought, and finally, about the value of the thought content. For otherwise, we might easily consider the environment not as a mere content of thought, but as a primary causal factor. When all this has become clear, then we shall recognize that correct thought is the basis of correct meditation, not however a substitute for it and not its little brother. It is just as necessary a condition as a positive pro-meditative attitude, as the readiness to create mental harmony, the readiness to master the self. If these thought exercises seem to be very similar to meditation itself, they are, nevertheless, merely preparations. Like all preparations, they have an absolutely positive, effective, and unmistakable aim. For instance, we are not polite to those around us because we hope to gain success in meditation, nor do we concentrate on our work simply for this reason, but we act because basically it is better to do so, and everything which is done better also serves meditation. The latter, in its turn, will raise us to a more positive potential as soon as we have elevated ourselves from a negative to a more reasonable level. To do all this because of meditation would simply mean that we wish to be rewarded by meditation. Meditation for the sake of results, however, would be an absurdity. Thus, our thought exercises are, in the first place, aids to the achievement of that clarity of thought which is so essential for our lives, and secondly, a transitional step to meditation. Let us go back to our classification. We must now proceed to a subdivision. Group A can be divided into 1, observation of breath, 2, observation of posture, 3, observation of movement, 4, observation of the parts of the body, 5, consideration of the basic elements, 6, consideration of the impermanence of matter. Group B is divided into 7, consideration of the kinds of feeling. Group C into 8, consideration of the forms of thought. Group D into 9, consideration of the objects of thought, which will be subdivided further. If we look carefully, we shall see that in this apparently exhaustive list, Group 2, mentioned in the beginning, thoughts about the influence of the environment, is contained in the group Objects of Thought, 9. For if we think of the environment, it becomes no more than an object of thought. Therefore, for purposes of meditation, Group 2 only exists in theory and in practice only when we do not think consciously, i.e., when we are not concentrated in a self-reflective but in a self-forgetting way. These 9 classes differ completely in that some of them are the objects of contemplation on special occasions, while others are objects of constant and general attention. General attention requires both posture and movement. What does this mean? It simply means that we must know what we are doing. Attention to posture and movement, we believe, is always there. For after all, we do not walk, stand, sit, or lie unconsciously. Although this might be true in general, it becomes a little more difficult if we are asked how we walk, stand, sit, or lie, for we have done it so attentively that after only 1 minute we can't for the life of us remember how, for instance, we put our feet down. Apparently, we have paid but little attention to those things which we believe to control so perfectly. Indeed, often we do not even know that we have moved at all, let alone why we have done it. What we have said in an earlier chapter about hands and feet may be applied most beneficially not only to our nervous movements, but to every single movement and what it signifies. This may be thought unnecessarily pedantic or some theoretical form of thought torture. Yet do we in fact rub our foreheads consciously during concentrated reflection as if to help our thoughts along? Equally, do we consciously hide our palms in moments of indecision? Or again, hold them out when we want to prove our innocence? Does the body become consciously tense when we are excited? And does our body relax consciously when we feel discouraged? No, all these movements are completely unconscious and can be interpreted by psychologist, the man who understands people. Our unconscious movements and actions betray us to those around us. Mr. Miller, who for quite some time has been trying to get a word in edgewise, is now fidgeting in his chair. Does he do that consciously? Now he interrupts. When on earth shall I have the time to think of my work and of my duties? If now I even have to watch my hands, I might just as well straight away become a yogi watching himself like a hawk, careful never to make a single false move. What makes you think that this is what a yogi does, Mr. Miller? And who on earth has told you to do it? Nobody wants you to watch yourself, but merely to reflect on things with clear thoughts. At every minute of the day, no matter what you are doing, you must do it with all your concentration. If you follow this rule, then not only have you a mind free for self-observation, but also for 101 other matters of moment. Why do we laugh at the absent-minded professor? Because his thoughts are never with his actions. He's always absorbed in something else and therefore cannot fulfill the demands of the moment even to the slightest degree. He becomes a comical figure. If my partner in conversation is not conscious, and he is not if he is only occupied with his own thoughts, then it is easy to entangle him because he can't see what I am getting at. But it is just the same the other way around. If therefore we attend exclusively to the matter in hand, we have a much greater chance of success from every point of view. Very well, Mr. Miller says, I understand that if it comes to important negotiations, I must be on my guard. But surely I can't watch every single step I take just as carefully. Surely that is utter nonsense. No, it isn't nonsense, only unusual. Quite the opposite. It would be nonsense to be flighty and thoughtless for 23 hours of the day, and then to expect us to concentrate on demand during the 1 hour of negotiation or meditation. It would be nonsense to expect always to know how to act in decisive moments if we haven't learned what to do at less decisive moments. We do not want you, Mr. Miller, to turn your thoughts into puppets, but only to avoid ill-considered and thoughtless actions. What you do, you must do wholeheartedly. So much for general, constant attention to movement and posture. The contemplation of breathing, which had first place in our list, is so important that we shall leave its exhaustive discussion to the next chapter. The observation of the parts of the body, especially of the inner parts, is an exercise in pure meditation, for here we have no other tool than the power of imagination, and thus we shall discuss it more fully later on within the framework of the classical objects of meditation. The purpose of this exercise is clear. We must learn to see the body as the most material element of our personality, not in order to despise it as a worthless machine, but in order to assign it the right place within our life progress, and not to deify it as the only expression of our beloved ego at the expense of the more modest but far more important components. We must and shall here recognize that the organic body is only the stage on which the many exciting life processes are enacted, but without which there could be no play at all. And just like a doctor performing a dissection, we shall try to imagine what lies inside this crudely material body, for even though we cannot see what happens within it, it is as much a part of us as our hands and feet. Wouldn't it be silly to ignore the existence of these hidden organs? A further step, which only sounds strange as long as we haven't tried it, is the contemplation of earth, fire, water, air as the basic elements of our body. Science has left this classification of the human organism heaven knows how far behind. Our science, if we didn't know it from books, then, as far as we're concerned, our body would have empty spaces, air, and be at a certain temperature, fire. The true chemical facts would be completely unknown to us from practical experience. We shall make these elements our basis, i.e., we shall contemplate our whole body as only we ourselves can. And as we understand it from experience, this too is no longer an exercise in attention, but a pure process of meditation. The same is the case in the next group, thoughts on the impermanence of matter, the search for the true I. As far as we are concerned, our life on earth ends in the white shroud in which we are buried. What happens after that is hidden in the secret womb of the earth and passes our understanding. We know this, but we do not wish to know it. We close our eyes to it, for only a few, the very strong, can face the ensuing process of disintegration. And this is as it should be, for it is dreadful to have to return to the earth what is hers. The Hindu burns all his dead, without exception, at the stake. Although I have an aversion to everything that is dead, this did not stop me from spending some hours with the ghats, less because of the Hindu methods of burial than in order to observe my own reactions. I am glad I went, for however keen one's fantasy, it can only create self-built images, and even the feelings arising from it are only self-generated if they are not experienced. If you wish to have a clear inner picture of what man is, go and see a body burnt at the stake. This is neither horrible, repulsive, nor unnatural. It only requires strong nerves. In depth, this experience is comparable only to birth itself. Here we can see that human life does not end with the closing of the coffin lid, since the ashes speak of something very different from the vague possibility of a strange subterranean existence. The Hindu knows that with the last breath there is demonstrated the division of forces. Functions cease, the earth takes back its own, but all that was capable of love, laughter, and tears is already prepared for new loving, laughing, and crying. Somewhere else, and this has been so ever since the creation of the world, we shall know this suddenly and unequivocally. Let he who says, I am only my body, go to the stake, and let him see the flesh go up in flames. Let him see how there the certain conviction is formed that we must look for the true I elsewhere than in the remaining ashes. For existence and life are no mere functions. In order to understand this, however, we need hours of the deepest meditation. It is wrong of some books on meditation to say that the contemplation of death is not for the Western man. For us, it is one of the deepest and purest of experiences, if only we see in death a natural phenomenon, and not what human prejudice has made of it. For where nature speaks directly, we always experience deeply. There are still some places in the heart which are reached more quickly by truth than by intellectual prejudice. The contemplation of feelings, Group B, is easier than would appear at first. Feelings can appear to be strong, weak, or apparently absent. They can be joyful, negative, or indifferent. They change with every sense impression, but most frequently they are so weak in their expression that they are unnoticed, if we do not watch out for them most carefully. We can make our feelings an object of constant contemplation, but this assumes a very high degree of thought mastery. It is very useful for occasional concentration, especially when we are concerned with determining who is responsible for our bad mood. Mr. Miller is always annoyed about the jammed window. Yesterday, too, it jammed, but did not make him cross because yesterday his feelings were definitely positive, just as today they are definitely negative. If he is aware of this, he will not blame the window, but his lack of concentration. For once the bad mood has got hold of him, it becomes extremely difficult to remove it simply by concentration. In most cases, it is only displaced. The moment that the first signs of negative feelings are noticed early in the morning, the surest remedy is to concentrate on their possible causes before any second signs appear. I have never experienced a single case in which a bad mood developed after this. If we make a habit of considering the first negative occurrence on a black day as our own fault, we shall have banished any subsequent misfortunes. This may sound like magic, but it is simple psychology, and above all, it is successful. Thought contemplation, Group C, is a little more far-reaching and more complicated, and can equally be the task of constant attention, which here too requires a high degree of mastery, of concentration. That too is not easy, for we are required to concentrate on that which is the essence of non-concentration, as also of meditation. Indeed, those will fare best who endeavor to develop all three, for in the Buddhist text it says quite rightly and instructively, thought, also known as citta, creates all distinction between all things. From the Kashyapariyavarta. Everything the shallow and the profound, the logical and the illogical, the important and the trivial, everything springs from thought and is determined and guided by thought. We mean nothing else here than the contemplation of the thought processes, or perhaps their essence. In other words, we must know whether we are concentrated, whether we think without prejudice or not, whether thoughts have an evil basis, whether they are due to a whim or to a calculation, etc. It is a watching of oneself in order to detect, to transform, and to give warning. If we discover that in the background there lurks a tendency which we have decided to attack, for everything begins in thought and ends in fiction, and not vice versa, then we have done more to fight inner and outer evils than is commonly assumed to be the case theoretically. If, for instance, we are occupied with important work which has to be completed quickly, and if suddenly we catch ourselves doodling or watching the street cleaner, then we must not simply recall our thoughts. This is no more than a drill. We must also ask them very seriously why they act in this manner. If we do this, we shall bring our true attitude into the open and thus expose our secret desires. This is true education. For it would be evil to delude oneself into believing that one is a very keen worker, if in fact one is not. It gives us a false picture of our potentialities and makes us very discontentedly perform our duty purely as a duty, while our true talents perish just because we weren't brave enough to face the truth. The world would have far more geniuses if all men would honestly feel concerned about their natural talents, which, after all, cannot be expressed in any other way than in the flow of thought. However, success does not lie in brooding, in thinking about our own capacity for genius, but in understanding the basis of thought. Not in dreams, in giving our thoughts free rein, but on the contrary, in the knowledge of why we think so, why we dream, why we brood, why we lack concentration, do we arrive at results. These results lead to the last group of our consideration, of our personality, the consideration of thoughts, objects, and their evaluation, Group D. This too, with varying intensity, may proceed on all three levels: general attention, concentration, and meditation. It is the most far-reaching and perhaps the most important group, for by it we form our basic attitude to the world around us. Therefore, we wish to discuss it in a special chapter, the philosophy of the thought content. The observation of breathing. Breathing is very strange. It works automatically, as do the other inner organs. Yet we can regulate it consciously. We could live quite well without some organs, and they all function without our being able to control or correct them. Without breathing, however, we cease to live, and although we can end our life by consciously ceasing to breathe, we never use this means when we are tired of living, even though it seems the nearest at hand, but use other methods instead. Breathing is the only conscious bodily function which, as it were, proceeds before our eyes. No other bodily processes are visible to us and are hardly, if at all, detectable. For this reason, respiration takes special place from every point of view. We shall use it as an aid and learn to value it. Above, we have spoken of the three forms of observation: general attention, concentration, and meditation. The breath is an object of observation which can only be considered under the heading of concentration, and this limitation must be strictly adhered to. For if one were to make breath an object of general constant attention, and if one were to do this consistently, then suddenly one evening, when attention wishes to change into the non-attention of sleep, we shall experience choking phenomena, because our breathing will revenge itself for this conscious watchfulness and these new methods. It will automatically stop its work. Again, this is the result of forced measures. The observation of breathing is the ideal means of introducing meditation through concentration, since it is not only advisable but absolutely essential to be concentrated before entering into meditation. Abstract ideas are little suited to this, and external means require a highly volitional, i.e., dynamic effort of attention, thus opposing the very nature of meditation. Ideally, we should observe an object with our eyes closed, for the visual sense impression, although always the most decisive, is unfortunately the one on which we can concentrate least easily. Breathing is the only concrete automatic, i.e., constantly active, process which we can observe without any great difficulty and with eyes closed. What is the greatest advantage of this? We can compare attention to circles about us whose center is our thought apparatus. The nearer the circle, the greater the concentration. And if the circle should lie within our so-called eye, then practical concentration is at its maximum. This is proved by the following fact alone. The farther the field of vision, the more objects we can see and thus consciously distinguish. We observe these objects, and that part of consciousness which observes them is withdrawn from the process of concentration, i.e., concentration is no longer absolute. However, if the eyes are closed, no external senses stimulus is involved, and we have the theoretical possibility of absolute concentration. Theoretically, what happens practically is that thoughts now become actions because they lack the living pictorial support. They have nothing to concern themselves with, and thus begin to construct from the raw material of received intuitions and impressions, honeycombs of calculation. From them we are likely to reap the questionably sweet mead of decisions. In these processes, the dynamics of restlessness lie hidden. The best way of purifying consciousness is spiritual relaxation, idle thought, i.e., the resting in itself of the spirit. Not thinking here means not constructing, not working with thoughts. This is the path to the purest form of thought, to achieve the exclusive occupation of the mind with one single object, which then may serve as a symbol of nature, of life, of the uncreated, uncompended, the one, the absolute. Breathing symbolizes life, for it is a process unconditioned by matter. It manifests itself in and with substance alone. In experiencing breathing, we experience life. We need not seek anything behind it because it can speak to us directly, and through it alone we can obtain answers to the questions: what is life? What am I? The old Indians called the soul Atman, which is the same word as the German Atem, breath. This does not mean that breath is the soul, but it does mean that when you have understood the essence of breathing, then you have understood the soul itself. As our breath, so our soul also. As our soul, so the I. And what is breath? This is the same question and requires the same answer as the famous poser of children. Where is the wind when it is not blowing? We laugh at this question because we are so clever. But if we should really try to give a serious answer, we suddenly have to stop laughing and we become embarrassed. Children's questions have the privilege of embarrassing us because we have forgotten to ask them ourselves. Nothing is more reasonable than to follow an incomplete answer with a why. We could very well make something like the wind into an object of meditation, to discover that it is merely a concept without any real basis in fact, that actually it is nothing but the motion of air, which had always been there before. In other words, that it does not exist at all. But that wind is there is undeniable. Thus we cannot say of wind that it is in the same way that an object is, or that it is not, as a dream image is not. This can be seen even more clearly in the case of breath, and if we suspect what it is about, this being and not being object, then we can answer questions on the soul and the I. What the answers will be depends on how exclusive our concentration on the object in question is. We do not wish to fall into the error of most classical and modern books on meditation, which tell the novice beforehand, you will be able to discover this and that. Try it yourself and find out what your own breath has to say to you. Sit down quietly, close your eyes, breathe, and follow your breath with attention. You will be well rewarded, but please remember our example of the fish. No exercise is recommended more highly by theoreticians and practitioners alike than the observation of breath. And from the most intellectual to the most mystical, there exists complete unity on the value of breath observation, since it involves all realms starting from concentration down to the deepest meditation. Yet there is no danger or hope that we shall suddenly be plunged from the observation of breath into a condition of meditation. The path is a long one. The observation of breathing itself is simple enough and gives proof positive that it is always the simplest things which are the most difficult, a fact which we might already have noticed during our lying still exercises. Thus, both of these exercises are somehow related, and this is their common importance. Let us stay a while before entering into details, and let us use breathing as the milestone for another short but essential survey. The absolute conditions for inner and therefore also outer developments are: 1. Physical conditions perfected through the lying still exercises. 2. Mental conditions perfected through general mental attention and through concentration. 3. Spiritual conditions perfected through meditation. However, we have not got there yet. We must avoid being weighed down by apparent necessities, by apparently having to think of 101 things. The less weighed down we begin the exercises, the better we have laid their foundations. Indeed, we shall notice that the essence of the secret lies in discarding. First of all, we must discard that nervousness which is expressed in physical restlessness, and this will give us an important faculty, that of becoming physically independent during concentration. Then we must discard roaming thoughts, and this will lead to the second faculty, that of becoming mentally independent during self-concentration. Only now we have arrived at the beginning of meditation proper, and yet we have achieved so much already that we could rightly ask, why should we still need meditation? This question would only be answered when we know what it is that we must discard through meditation and by what means we may become spiritually independent. Then what is the technical procedure in the observation of breathing? The most important law for concentrated and meditative observation of breathing is only watch breath, do not influence it. We do not wish to do any breathing exercises, no hatha yoga, no pranayama, no exercises at all. In fact, we wish to do no more than watch our breath coming and going. Footnote. The reader will forgive me if I repeat it once more, but it cannot be said often and seriously enough, and it must be stressed. Yoga breathing exercises may produce the most serious damage to health if they are not supervised by an experienced yoga teacher. End of footnote. Strangely enough, in the beginning, this will cause us some discomfort. We shall notice our breath objecting to such inquisitive watchfulness. It will start behaving like a schoolgirl and will not move naturally any longer. It will become strangely deep, will be clearly noticeable, the blood will get more oxygen through increased respiration, and the heart will beat a little faster. All in all, things will be so strange that the observation of breathing will become a very exciting matter. If, however, we should feel uncomfortable, then we must give it up with a smile and think of something else for a little while. Breath will acknowledge it with a grateful sigh. We can repeat the procedure after a few minutes or, in any case, during our next exercise, until such time that we can watch as long as we wish without experiencing any difficulties in breathing. Why does our breathing seem to be obstructed? Is it so in fact? Oddly enough, yes, without our wanting or feeling it. When we do not watch breath, apparently it seems to be as regular as an automatic bellows, but only apparently so. In fact, the opposite is the case. If left to itself, it is so surprisingly irregular that this merits some discussion and is also most instructive. We only think that we must breathe regularly. Breath itself, however, is regulated by the precise physical requirements of the moment. These, in their turn, are influenced and determined by the work of the sense organs, amongst others. Every external impression requires a new inner orientation, and this is done by the psyche, which is in direct contact with the organs, especially with the heart. Every inner movement, strong or weak, has its physical reaction, and in order to level these reactions, the organs, especially the heart, have to work at different rates. If breathing, as a connection between outer world and inner function, or a completely uniform bellows without the slightest possibility of change, then the organs themselves would have to level out the difference in the fuel requirements, and our inner functions would differ from moment to moment. Through irregular breathing, however, we obtain just the right amount of oxygen needed by the heart, and so it can work evenly without giving us any physical discomfort. The more even our psychophysical impressions, the more even is our breathing. The more lively they are, the more lively is it. If one observes a sleeping person, we can tell by his breathing whether he is dreaming or whether he is in a dreamless deep sleep. At the start of our observation of breathing is prejudiced, overinterested, and tinged with the false conviction that we must at all times breathe peacefully and completely evenly. It is for these reasons that we regulate respiration by force. And since this stimulates it to greater activity, when it proceeds unconsciously, it sometimes stops for seconds. The heart has to bear the consequences. This is an interesting fact which even those with heart complaints can test without danger, if only they stop as soon as it becomes unpleasant. Positive results come more quickly than in the lying still exercises. After only a few weeks, we shall theoretically be able to watch our breathing without any difficulty, sometimes for hours. In practice, we shall hardly be able to do so because our power of concentration, of thinking of breath alone, is discouragingly small. In order to learn to concentrate for a longer period of time at all, without external thoughts destroying the attempt, the observation of breathing offers, if not the only, certainly the best means. Here's yet another suggestion for purposes of the exercise. What do you do on the bus early in the morning? I know, first you read the newspaper, then you brood, then you dream, and then you must get off. Let us change the sequence a little. Try, even when standing in a crowded tube or bus, to arrest your thoughts from one stop to the next, and to concentrate on breathing alone. Turn it into a sport. Even if you don't manage between the first two stops, perhaps you will between the next two. Do this until it displeases you. Then you may read your newspaper. This will probably help you to gain a tremendous distance from the annoying things of events of the day. The more so because soon you will notice that you can extend the exercise over 2 or 3 stops. This is a great achievement in itself and will certainly have 101 favorable consequences during the rest of the day. There are various methods of observing respiration, each one with a significance of its own. 1. Observation of breathing as an independent means of concentration. 2. Observation of the path of the breath within the body. 3. Observation of inhalation and exhalation as bodily functions. 4. Observation of breathing as a process. These are 4 methods of observation and differ completely from one another, both in procedure and in results. It is therefore advisable to be guided by practical experience and to observe the given sequence. We shall discuss the best way of doing so. Experience shows that the first exercise is the easiest and the most pleasant. With this exercise, the breath must be watched as if it were a rosary, a sequence of pearls which have to be counted and no more. From depth, duration, path, etc., of each breath is completely unimportant. Counting, however, proceeds pictorially, i.e., as soon as breathing begins, a luminous number has to rise before our closed eyes. For the duration of the breath, which proceeds in and out as peacefully as in sleep, we must be able to see the number in front of us, and this so clearly and pictorially that we notice every detail of its form, whether it is plastic, its color, its size, its shape, down to the finest detail. The weaker the picture of the number, the smaller the concentration, and this will always occur with some numbers. Thus, we must count up to 10, where the 10 is represented by a 0. Then we start again. As is the case in all other exercises, this one too is only done for as long as it gives us pleasure. Rather than become nervous, we must stop. Success will come by itself. This exercise requires the participation of a large part of our inner self, so that the danger of distraction is relatively little, but naturally by no means excluded. Similarly, with the next exercise, the observation of the path which the breath follows within our bodies. We all know only too well that there are objective limits to this endeavor. Nonetheless, we shall try it, for it is less the result of observation which is important than the result of our efforts. We do not wish to forget that breathing itself is not as important as its present task, i.e., to become an aid to concentration. Indeed, just because it is so extremely difficult to follow the path of the breath attentively, how it streams through the nose, the nasal cavity, the throat, the pharynx, the bronchi, into the lungs, and how it streams out again along the same path. Yes, even how with every drawing of breath, something strangely refreshing flows into all parts of our body. It is an excellent aid to concentration. This exercise is definitely more difficult than the previous one, and therefore it is best carried out only when the first exercise can proceed with some degree of concentration. The third exercise is technically more simple than the previous one because the object of observation is more easily understood. It is no more than the renunciation of concentrated thought in favor of quiet observation, and here lies the danger, for when thought is not strictly disciplined, it may easily wander. Here we only consider the physical feeling produced in the nasal cavities by the breath as it streams in and out. Thus, we do not observe the process of breathing, nor any other affected parts of the body, but only the edges of the nasal passages, nothing else. This is a step backwards as far as the amount of inner effort is concerned, but is decisive progress in the direction of our goal, meditation. Do not work your way through this exercise too quickly, and if you cannot feel at ease for at least 5 breaths, then you must not yet proceed to the next, but must return to the previous exercise. There is no need to hurry. The last of these exercises will only be mentioned very briefly because essentially it is part of the meditation itself. In order to understand it fully, we must first have mastered the realm of concentration, not only its description, but mainly its practice. This observation of breathing as a process is a form of attention without the intervention of active thought, owing to the complete pacification of pictorial thinking. Thinking without pictures and concepts is pure meditation and will not be discussed for the time being, since we cannot understand it as yet. If we mention the 4th exercise all the same, we only do so because concentration is not unrelated to meditation, but is its true source. In the course of this exercise, consciousness is more and more separated from pictorial and conceptual thinking. Mental activity ceases more and more, so that concentration, i.e. attention, begins to become more centralized and independent when we reach the 4th group, observation of breathing as a process. Until this is attained, however, our original impatience, this most dynamic of all inner processes, must have abated. And for many months we shall do no more than let the luminous numbers rise up before us. Our inherited characteristics determine the duration of this exercise even before the start, by an iron law of nature. Only when we are sincerely determined to stick to the first exercise can we count on soon being ready for the second. Some do so after months, some after weeks, but some only after decades. Certainly the intelligent person will find things much more difficult than the less intelligent, but everyone with patience and perseverance will get there sooner or later. Swami Vivekananda, the well-known Hindu missionary, tells the following beautiful legend in his book Raja Yoga. The holy Narrator was traveling through India. There he saw a penitent who was in deep meditation and who had battled so long and so hard for deliverance that the ants had built a great hill around him. He had been sitting motionless for years. "Where are you going?" he asked the holy Narada. "I'm going to heaven," he answered. "Would you please ask God when I can count on my deliverance?" the penitent asked. A little later, the holy Narada met another man who was happy in high spirits, did not punish his body, and believed he did enough when he fulfilled his duty with a pure heart. He too asked the holy man where he was going. "When you go to heaven, please ask God when he will deliver me. I would so much like to know." Many years had passed when the holy Narada returned along the same path. "Did you ask God?" the ascetic demanded of him. "Oh, yes," the holy man replied. "You will be reborn 4 times more, and then you will have reached the end." The man began to complain and to cry. "See how I plague myself," he said, "throughout my whole life. Must I wait another 4 lives? Oh, I am at the end of my strength. I am cursed." And the holy man quietly went along his way and met the second man. "Well," this one said, "when can I count on my deliverance? Tell me, holy friend." The holy man pointed to a mighty tree which reached right up to heaven. "Do you see this tree?" he asked. "As many leaves as this tree carries, so many lives will you still have. Then you will be delivered." The man was jubilant. "Will it be so soon? Is that the end so near? How happy I am! I am almost grateful for your message." And his eyes shone with joy. The holy Narada went on his way with a smile, for he knew this man had already found his deliverance in this life. Philosophy of the thought content. Apart from thought, there is no world at all, for what we do not know does not concern us. As soon as I know something, I notice it, perceive it, it then belongs to the world. I have to come to terms with it and to include it in the infinite reservoir of my experiences. Every thought has an intuitive cause within the spirit. It is born purposefully. Its further usefulness is evaluated, and if it is found to serve our purpose, it is then translated into action. Thus, the applications of thought are firstly spiritual, secondly intellectual, and thirdly practical. 1. We have an idea. 2. We make a decision about it. 3. We translate the decision into action. This is how it all looks to our mind. 1. The thought is born without either picture or concept as a purely intuitive impression, and at that moment it is pure. 2. The mental process of assimilating this pure thought hardens it into a concept. 3. The thought is given a pictorial form so that it can be fitted into the realm of our experience of the world around us. This is no longer contains any representation of the true content of the thought. We remain with only a pictorial symbol of the thought, which is no more the depth of the thought itself than a picture of the life of the person it portrays. Of course, this does not mean that these processes are unnatural. On the contrary, life would be impossible without them. Nevertheless, the reflection in the mirror must not be confused with the original. Goethe says in Faust, "All life is but a colorful reflection." And all we wish to do is to understand the source of the reflection, the true light, the origins of soul and life, indeed the cosmos, how they express themselves in us and through us, and how they make up our existence, our picture of the world and of ourselves. All this is not meant to influence our ideas of God and eternity, and has nothing to do with religion, for we do not wish to create a new heaven for anybody, but only to turn his old ways of thinking towards himself. To think more consciously must be our motto, not to believe more critically. For, as we said at the beginning, before we bother with eternity, we must put our own house in order. Need it be stressed that if we do so, religious questions will solve themselves, and indeed assume a greater significance? We have dealt with this question of the basis of thought and of its resultant conscious pictures in order to investigate the psychological potentialities for meditation. As long as we consider the picture before us, the process of seeing, and the response in the soul as three different things which are relatively unrelated, we shall confront the world as a given fact, but our own psyche as something transcendental. In vain, we shall try to find a connection between them beyond that of servant and master. We shall see the world as a primary influence and the psyche merely as its receptive victim. This way we should not make any progress. It is quite false for us to consider ourselves as worms exclusively created for the purpose of being trodden on. We shall continue to do so, however, as long as we accept the mere surface of the thought image as the real thing, deny its physical basis, and dismiss demonstrable facts as mere accidents or as false demonstrations. It is the basic tenet of modern existentialism that we are apparently thrown into the world without hope. The truth is, however, that modern man has completely lost himself. We must make sure of the answer to the following questions. Do I see the world as it is, or is the world as I see it? Do I see reality, or is reality only a relative response in my soul? Our thought is not simply a means whereby we can contact the world around us, but without thinking, without consciousness, there would be no world at all around us. There would be no one to tell us about it. Further, there would be no regrets if we had to renounce this world and its values, since there would be no self-consciousness, no conscious I, for whose sake we would regret it. We imagine that everything around us is exactly as we see it, that it couldn't be any different just because we see it so. Our dependence on it seems to be a very strict law of nature, so that the very thought of living without any concepts, and indeed living more fully, is usually considered as a foolish, speculative, and useless theory without any special value. Platonic idealism is often cited as an example. But at this stage we can be compared to a child with so pathological a longing for a rocking horse that it has no other interest and could never be tempted by a promise of a 50% dividend. To him, the rocking horse is the ultimate reality, and the large dividend is a useless speculation which can have no advantages, since the child's mental capacity cannot grasp the higher facts. Nor will the lonely old man at the approach of death see anything exciting in doing good business. For him, it will be no more than a ridiculous rocking horse, useless at the moment of final decision. Thus all three, the child, the man, and the old one, are on entirely different levels of existence and have different ways of looking at things. Everyone believes that he alone has the correct idea of the world, and he is quite right, as far as his momentary requirements are concerned. It is not he who has passed a certain age limit who ceases to be a child, but he who has outgrown the ideas and needs of childhood. Only the capacity of the mind can decide when we have reached this stage. What lies behind us, what we have consciously disregarded and outgrown, like the rocking horse, has suddenly become ridiculous. What lies in front of us we cannot say. It is an unknown world, which has absolutely nothing to do with the demands that life makes on us at the moment. From all these examples, we see that we can look at the world with different eyes, without, however, changing the world itself. Those who are aware of this must surely ask themselves logically, on what do our constantly changing desires depend? Well, in the first place, we shouldn't have them at all were we sages or saints, who are well known to be above all desires. Why that is so we cannot understand as yet, but that it is so has long been known. To be quite frank, we all lack wisdom. When wisdom is entirely lacking, then we are the ailing servants of our endless desires. We think of nothing but them, plague ourselves till we have satisfied them, only to find that new desires are born, and so ad infinitum. This explains why the sage is happy and contented, while the fool rushes about from morning till night with a nervous frown, trying to increase his possessions. We said it before, it is wisdom which is the measure of consciousness, and consciousness behaves differently towards those things it wants to own and to those which leave it indifferent. Our picture of the world around us is not determined by it considered as a whole, but only by the degree of our dependence on the individual parts which go to make up the whole. Thus, when we do ask about the absolute value of the world around, then the answer can only be another question. What is this world around us composed of? We must analyze once more. Every sense organ, vision, hearing, smelling, taste, tactile feeling, represents, from the point of view of desire, a world in itself. Nevertheless, we shall pass over this subdivision for the moment. We simply perceive with one of our sense organs. What does perceiving mean? 1. The contact of one of these sense organs with the object. 2. The sensation which is created through this contact. 3. The registration of the sensation. 4. The positive, negative, or indifferent attitude towards the object perceived. 5. The mental grasping of the object. 6. The physical unconscious process. 7. The inclusion of the picture of the object in the storehouse of experience. These 7 processes represent an almost immeasurably short but typical moment of consciousness abstracted from a constant process. They are found in every step of meditation, and all this already proves that meditation, indeed, even the deepest, has nothing to do with ecstasy or hypnosis, which are simply states in which the processes have been arrested at one stage or another. since these 7 processes belong both to the disoriented consciousness of everyday life and to the deepest concentrated meditation, we must look for the distinction elsewhere. It is found by investigating 1. How this 7-fold process takes place. 2. What additional factors are at work. Buddhist psychology of the Abhidharma differentiates with regard to 2. 1. 19 factors representing the basic elements of wisdom. 2. 14 factors of negative character which include all human shortcomings and which impede wisdom. 3. 6 active factors of will. 4. 3 chief factors of active morals. 5. 2 factors which express our immediate spiritual participation. 6. Reason as the basic distinguishing mark of Homo sapiens, of the reasonable being, of man in general. Footnote. The factors enumerated above are called 1. Faith, in the chosen way of salvation, mental clarity, morality, sensitivity, lack of avarice, lack of hate, spiritual equilibrium, harmony of psychical elements, elasticity of consciousness, empathy of psychical elements, empathy of consciousness, activity of the psychical elements, motility of consciousness, right orientation of the psychical elements, right orientation of consciousness, activity of consciousness. 2. Delusions, shamelessness, lack of scruples, distraction, avarice, wrong intentions, pride, hatred, envy, selfishness, self-torture, qualms of conscience, laziness, slackness, lack of clarity in thought expressed as doubt in the chosen way of salvation. 3. Stimulation, consideration, decisiveness, energy, interest, desire to put into action. 4. Right speech, right action, right way of life. 5. Compassion and the ability to share the joy of others. 6. Reasonableness. In the last chapter of the appendix, we shall have something to say about the psychology of Christian mystics. In principle, it is rather similar, if not as far-reaching. The 7 processes belong, as we have said above, to everyday consciousness. The other 45 factors can be found in the most various combinations, although never altogether. A man's character may be evaluated by how many of the 14 negative characters have gone into his makeup and how strongly they are represented. Meditation can now begin. By means of the preparatory exercises, we have created a form of consciousness which may serve as a stepping stone. And we have 1. The presence of 7 factors of conscious observation. 2. The presence of 6 active factors of will. 3. The negative factors are pacified so that they no longer manifest themselves, at least not during meditation itself. 4. The presence in principle of wisdom. This, however, is not an active process, but only a potential or factual condition. 5. The 3 chief factors of active morals are not active here, but are potentially present in the previous group. 6. The 2 factors of immediately spiritual participation are also inactive, but are potentially present in group 4. 7. Reason is present as a static, passive factor. Now, the farther we go towards deep meditation, i.e., in the direction of absolute concentration free of any illusions, the more do the active elements recede, so that finally only positive and passively receptive factors remain. There's no longer any action on the part of those elements of consciousness which are active, i.e., prejudiced in themselves, and which could cloud our vision. If we look at the practical consequences of this scholastic classification, we see that in the ideal state of meditation, 1. The 7 elements of conscious activity are without any hidden moral or volitional values, but are purely functional. 2. The 19 potential or factual, but in any case only passively receptive, and in terms of our final goal, positive factors are functionally inactive and merely serve as standards for the functioning of consciousness. 3. Reason is neither functional nor value judging, but merely orders events. 4. Those active remnants of consciousness somehow act as the motor preserving the condition of meditation. The higher the degree of meditation, the fewer of these remnants remain, so that the highest meditation is a pure state of conscious clarity beyond the dynamics of logical conclusions. To simplify even further, we must have for meditation 1. The natural functions of consciousness, 2. Our momentary character, 3. Reason, 4. The functions of the will which drive us on. These factors determine 1. What we see, hear, smell, taste, feel, and think. 2. How we feel it, pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent. 3. That we recognize and judge it. 4. To what use we put it. The motor factors are old acquaintances of ours, for they represent the following drives which are so essential in the beginning. 1. Stimulation to meditation through the certain conviction of the usefulness of a higher development. 2. The consideration of the path to be taken, or the control of this path. 3. The willpower to strive constantly towards an aim. 4. Energy to persist. 5. Interest in oneself and the task. 6. The will to realize not so much the path, meditation, as the goal, higher development or salvation. We still want to find out how and why these active elements of the will recede, or rather how they change into conditions of consciousness. 1. Recedes as soon as the conviction is won that the path which we have taken is the right one. 2. Recedes as soon as we clearly recognize the path that we have to take. 3. Recedes as soon as the aim has assumed lasting value. 4. Recedes as soon as the striving has become a habit. 5. Recedes as soon as we have penetrated to our core, concentration, and to the core of the task, meditation. 6. Recedes as soon as the first step of the aim, fourth degree of deep meditation, is reached. Through concentrated thought, we rise above active thought into the realm of reflection. Unconcentrated thought is tinged with prejudice and thus with negative characteristics. Only when we have shed them does purity begin. Only when we transcend dynamics shall we feel the fresh wind of the Absolute. This is neither magical nor mystical, but just as the fish of Louis Agassiz suddenly became more than a mere surface, and just as our prejudices and die-hard opinions veil a host of truths, so does every object of meditation show us another and a much profounder face. Concentration leads thought towards deeper vision. In this we shall find the beginning of a strange process where we face nothing but material facts and yet somehow feel sobered. This is the moment when prejudice and bias step into the background, when our preconceived picture of the object resolves and only facts remain. With this, thought is pacified. It is no longer jolted from the storehouse of prejudice and slowly steps out of its accustomed course. Now there begins that pure and immediate experience which is known to us already from the deep enjoyment of art, which too does not ask for form, picture, and concept, but only requires experience. Every forced conscious striving, every active wish would not only destroy this experience, it would not let it arise in the first place, even if we were ready for concentration. Every act of will which leads one step beyond this will only prevent the expected result. For what lies on the heights of this yonder can only be reached by a leaving behind, and is thus not only beyond all will, but beyond all words. Meet me at the next video where we continue with the book titled The Secret of Meditation by Hans Ulrich Rieker. If you haven't done so, please do hit the like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe to the channel.